Okay, Alejandro.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I'm hear you now.
So my question was, so what stops the Russians from just dropping an atomic bomb on the Ukraine? I mean, I just don't understand this. Why don't they use poison gas, chemicals, or whatever? And it seems they're holding back. And then I guess what would we do in response? Because I know the South Koreans are very concerned about the same thing in North Korea, saying stuff like the US would never sacrifice California to save South Korea by like retaliating with a nuclear strike. And I basically think that's true. And so I'm just make light of the whole situation, maybe.
So I think that what's stopping the Russians is fear that there will be retaliation. That is, they are worried about the response of the West. They know overall they're weak, even if the West doesn't use nuclear weapons against them. The West would defeat the Russian armies in days, and could destroy the Russian military and their capabilities to wage war very, very quickly. So I think what is holding them back is they don't want to bring the West fully into the war where they are in direct conflict with the West. And they fear that by using nuclear weapons, and I think this is the message they get from back channels, is that if they use nuclear weapons, then the West will intervene. The West will enter. Now, there are reports that they have used chemical weapons, in a number of different locations in Ukraine, in limited quantities. That's at least according to the Ukrainians. I don't know if there have been independent verifications of that. But yeah, they're afraid of retaliation, and that's the same thing with the North Koreans. It's one thing to say, yeah, U.S. might not want to risk California, but the reality is that the U.S. could destroy most, if not all, of the North Korean nuclear capabilities before they ever leave the ground or before they enter the atmosphere. That is, the U.S. has capabilities of seeing the North Koreans moving the missiles out of their mountain hideouts and into the open in order to launch and destroying them right there in their launch pads. And the North Koreans just don't want to test that. They don't want an all-out war where they would lose against the United States, and that's what's holding them back.
Is it also more the artillery pointed at Seoul from North Korea is more of a threat because that's diffused over the
Yes,
entire country?
yes, but that again is they're not going to use that because if they start bombing Seoul, they are afraid that the U.S. and look, the South Korean army by itself would destroy North Korea, but with the U.S., I mean, North Korea just doesn't have a chance, and they know that. At some level, they know that.
So you have said before that you don't think the U.S. should be involved, or you should that the U.S. should withdraw bases and not defend South Korea in the event of an attack. And I'm wondering, do you think the same thing about Ukraine, or you think when if you the U.S. actually if Russia actually used the nukes, the U.S. should intervene, and how does that differ from South Korea?
So I think the number of differences. One, South Korea is a rich country that can defend itself, and we should allow it to have nukes. That is, we should sell the South Koreans nukes so they can defend themselves, and they are rich enough and they have a large enough military capability that they can take on North Korea by themselves. The United States doesn't have to get involved, although right now we have a treaty with them. So as long as the treaty is in place, we should be involved. We can't just walk away from a treaty. I think the situation is different in Ukraine. One is Ukraine cannot defend itself without Western and U.S. support, um, because it's a much poorer country. Particularly if Putin used nukes, that would basically mean that he is willing to use nukes in conflict. That means, if, and not if, but when he finishes with Ukraine and launches an attack on one of the NATO countries, that could deteriorate into nuclear war. Better to deal with him now before he actually, engages in an all-out nuclear war when he doesn't know if we'll respond or not. Better to engage now than to wait for that to happen. Also, fallout in Ukraine is very likely to drift either towards Europe, and the rest of Europe. That could be a real concern for Europeans in terms of radiation. And again, you could conceive of it as an act of war against Europe more broadly, and therefore against NATO, and therefore against the United States. So absolutely, if Putin uses nukes, Russia's military capabilities without the U.S. using a nuke should be wiped out. And it should be made clear to him what would happen if he tried to use a nuke again. Moscow would be incinerated. I mean, that should be very, very clear to Putin. He should have no doubts about that.
And what I guess is non-proliferation a legitimate concern? Like, even if they're good countries, you just don't want that many nukes floating around, or is that like every free country should have a nuke?
I think free countries generally should have nukes. If Taiwan had a nuke, there wouldn't be a Chinese threat. If Japan had nukes, there wouldn't be a Chinese threat. South Korea had nukes, there wouldn't be a North Korean threat. This dependence on America, given the state of America in particular, given Donald Trump is president and who knows who comes next. I think free countries generally should have whatever it takes in order to defend themselves. And right now, in order to defend yourself, it takes nuclear bombs. So yeah, bomb up, arm yourself to the tooth.